Traveling to Alaska can get expensive, whether you're flying the long way there or starting from Seattle or Vancouver on a cruise. Like a lot of people, we had postponed what seemed like a major undertaking. Was it worth it? Spoiler alert, now that we've gone, we loved every bit of the trip so much that we're ready to go back. It was worth every cent. Hi everyone, this is Your World and welcome to it, where I talk about my visits to some interesting places. I'm Bill Bernstein. This video is about what we saw as we cruised along the Inside Passage on the Alaska coastline, then on to Whittier, then by train to Denali, and finally on to Fairbanks, hoping to see the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights. This was on a land-sea package on Holland America. The ship was the Noordam, and I'll talk about the ship and our experience on board later, but let's get right into the details of what we saw, because we saw a lot. The cruise started in Vancouver, and we arrived there a couple of days before the cruise. We did this partly to visit friends, but mainly because we always like to arrive at least a day early before a cruise just to be safe. 2 days is even better as we had time to enjoy Vancouver. One of the attractions for visitors is Granville Island, and we stayed in a boutique hotel there, the Granville Island Hotel. Vancouver is a beautiful city, and the views over the water were really nice. Here's a quick peek at our visit to Grouse Mountain, a popular tourist attraction very close to the city. You take a gondola up, and if you're going on a nice day, you go through the clouds and get a very pretty view from above. We arrived just at the right time for the lumberjack show, complete with competitions on climbing, sawing, and log rolling. After boarding the Holland America ship, the MS Noordam, we had a nice view of the harbor before sailing, and as you can see, everyone felt pretty good at the sail away. The only thing subscribing does is enable you to easily go to the channel to see if there are other videos that you'd like, and it helps me in YouTube's eyes. Sunset that evening was, like many sunsets at sea, beautiful. The first stop on our cruise was Ketchikan, where the excursion we chose was the Black Bear Wildlife and Nature Walk with the hope of coming close to some black bears. Ketchikan is in the world's northernmost rainforest. We drove to an area with a boardwalk about 10 feet above the ground. About 2 minutes into our walk, Kim, my wife, held her hand up. She had spotted a bear cub in a tree. Just after that, we saw what was probably the mama bear with a fish. A couple of minutes later, we spotted this bear catching a fish. You can see from the edge of the boardwalk, we were pretty close. Here's another look at that grab. Then we watched this other bear walking off into the trees. We continued on the boardwalk until we reached the wildlife sanctuary, where we had a close look at some of their visitors. This eagle, Sitka, is injured and unable to catch prey and survive in the wild, so he's been living there for a few years. This sweatshirt is from that nature walk and is from the Alaska Wildlife Sanctuary. After we sailed from the port, we were treated to a view of a gorgeous rainbow. As we arrived in Juneau, there was another striking view, and then after breakfast we were ready to be picked up for our ride to the airport for our Mendenhall Glacier helicopter and guided walk. Our group went in 3 helicopters with the passengers distributed by weight. We were lucky enough to be seated in the front of the 3rd helicopter, so we had a great view of the other 2 as we followed them toward the glacier and over the glacier. The flight itself was a great experience with some wonderful views. Then we landed, listened to some info about the glacier.
This glacier is about 13 miles long and a mile and a half wide. 7 miles early, we have the Mendenhall Towers, where we get our name from.
And spent some time walking around on the ice.
Thank you so much.
We see the blue color because of the wavelength of light as it passes through the ice. That's Kim getting ready to drink some of the pure, very cold water from the melting ice. Since 1929, the Mendenhall Glacier has retreated due to melting ice, 1 3/4 miles. That same evening, we went on a whale quest. We saw a few flukes, or tails of whales, as well as blow, often called spout, which is the whale breathing. We didn't get any great pictures, but we were shocked when a whale whose spout we had gotten a glimpse of in the distance suddenly almost surfaced just a couple of feet in front of the boat. The next day we docked at Skagway, known as a first stop during the gold rush as miners tried to strike it rich in the Klondike. We rode the White Pass Rail and Yukon train on the narrow gauge tracks, built against all odds in those days, climbing a few thousand feet and crossing a narrow wooden bridge before passing briefly into Canada. The next morning we were in Glacier Bay, a protected area in which only a couple of ships a day are allowed. This is always a highlight of cruises to go there. They opened up the bows of the ship on a few decks for passengers to go out and have a good view. This is usually about seeing lots of wildlife, but we weren't so lucky. Due to conditions, we didn't get too close to the shore or the glacier, and we were there at the end of the season. But hanging out on the deck was very nice. Another area with views of glaciers is College Fjord, where we were the following day. On our cruise, the views here were more spectacular, and we spent a lot of time walking to different areas on the ship to get the best looks we could. We wished we could have spent a lot more time in College Fjord. Weather determines a lot in Alaska. When we woke up the next morning, it was time to disembark and board the train for the next part of our trip, the visit to Denali. While this was a long, maybe 10-hour train ride, the time passed quickly and we all enjoyed it. Some on the train saw a moose running along, but I missed it. We finally arrived in Denali. Our excursion the next day was a photography workshop. 4 of us were driven by a professional photographer to some of the best sites for pictures and given some advice on getting the pictures. Because of the weather, we weren't able to see Denali, which is the highest mountain in North America. We learned that if measured from its base, Denali is the tallest mountain in the world, but Everest starts at a much higher elevation, so is considered the highest peak. The reason we chose to take this trip in September was with the hope of seeing the Aurora Borealis, the northern lights. Our first night in Fairbanks, our guides took us to a remote area they use, and we got really lucky. I'll just let you see some of the photos. For anyone interested, I have another video talking about taking the pictures with the Samsung 21 or 22 Ultra. We stayed in Fairbanks as we had planned a couple of days after that, as we had heard that if you were there for 3 nights in September through May, your chances of seeing the Aurora are 80%. We hoped for another look, but the next 2 nights were rainy and we didn't get to see it again. But it was true, we were there that 1 night out of 3. We got lucky. Some details about the ship, the MS Noordam. But first, I have to say that we felt very fortunate about the entire trip. We were in Ketchikan during salmon spawning season, we had a clear day to go to the glacier in Fairbanks, and we were able to see the northern lights. The process of boarding in Vancouver was pretty long. Lines going through security took quite a while. Even when we got through and were ready to board, there was quite a wait while they finished cleaning the ship, even though we were among the first group to board, as we were in a NEPTUNE suite. We had booked our cruise almost 2 years earlier during the height of the pandemic, when nobody was booking cruises and the cruise lines were offering great deals. Holland America has been going to Alaska longer than any other cruise line, so they have priority access to certain areas. For example, I mentioned that only 2 ships a day are allowed in Glacier Bay. Similarly, in Skagway, one of the docking areas had been blocked by a landslide, but our ship had no problem. The capacity of the Noordam is just over 1,900, so we never felt too crowded. Although we paid for internet access, the reception in our stateroom was pretty sketchy. We did find the reception much better in certain areas, such as the NEPTUNE lounge, which we had access to. We ate at the same table in the main dining room most nights, so the wait staff knew us after the first meal and were careful to cater to our every need. This was handled very nicely and was impressive, something you'd expect more from a luxury line. We ate most dinners in Club Orange, which is part of the main dining room on older ships like the Noordam, but a separate room on newer ships. There was a good choice of dinners for me as a vegetarian, so I have to give them credit for that. The many items available made it easy for me. Holland America advertises different menu items for Club Orange, which means one item added each night. The poolside grill had some interesting burgers, and I could have any of them made using a vegetarian Beyond Burger. They get a big check mark for that. Holland America ships have the auditorium, the world stage. There are performances of BBC Earth and Lincoln Center stage. There is the Rolling Stone Rock Room, B.B. King's Blues Club, Billboard Online, and for kids, Clubhouse. So there's a lot to do on board. We enjoyed the casino. My cousins tried out the slot machines while I took time a few nights at the craps table. In my videos about cruising, I tried to mention tips for travelers. There's a link included in the comments just below the title. Since Kim and I had been on a couple of Viking cruises, in our minds we were constantly comparing cruising in the Neptune suite on Holland America, considered a premium line, with what we experienced on Viking, a luxury line. You can find out what we think by clicking on this video comparing them. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, so long from all of us in your world.